Good evening. Welcome to another live edition of the Anomaly Archives Patreon Anomaly Academy monthly presentations. I'm Smiles Lewis, the founder of the nonprofit 501c3 Anomaly Archives Scientific Anomaly Institute. We were founded in 2003, so we've been around for a couple of decades now. We are dedicated to the preservation of anomalous materials, whether they be the research notes of investigators, researchers, scientists, or the materials of experiencers, witnesses, those who have close encounters with whatever strange phenomena that are out there, apparitions, ghosts, aliens, cryptids, that sort of thing. UFOs, of course, and parapsychological experiences, paranormal, ghosts, hauntings, that sort of thing. We cover a wide array of material, and you can find out more about us at anomalyarchives.org. And of course, you are already probably a member of our Patreon. Thank you for being a patron. You can find out more at patreon.com/anomalyarchives. And I'm really excited to hear this presentation tonight from friend and fellow seeker, Chris Rutkowski. I think I first found out about Chris in the late 1980s. I was, or early 1990s, perhaps. It was whenever I found my way to the UFO updates mailing list created and managed by Errol Bruce Knapp, another fellow Canadian like Chris Rutkowski. And I found there an amazing community of people interested in the subject of UFOs. And I've followed his work ever since. And now he's actually running with some other folks, the UFO Updates Facebook group, and continuing his seeking for information related to the subject of UFOs and other strange phenomena. Chris Rutkowski is a Canadian science writer and educator with a background in astronomy, but with a passion for teaching science concepts to children and adults. Since the mid-1970s, he has also been studying reports of UFOs and writing about his investigations and research. He has published several books ranging from Visitations in 1989 to, oh gosh, so many more, like over a dozen, the Big Book of UFOs in 2010, and chapters in other books. He also writes on cryptids and both fiction and nonfiction. He was a contributing editor of the International UFO Reporter and was the editor of the Swamp Gas Journal, and occasional ufozine that was first published in 1978 when he was part of the Decadent Winnipeg Fandom. He's a past president of the Winnipeg Science Fiction Society. And, you know, he's no stranger to archives. Back in 2019, he began donating his own archives to the University of Manitoba. And we were just chatting about when he started that process, and it's ongoing. And I can't wait to hear more about that. But I was honored to be featured in an UFO anthology alongside him and others called UFOs Reframing the Debate, published in 2017. You can find out more about him at his websites, UFORUM, that's uforum.blogspot.com, and of course at Canadian UFO Report.com. And let's bring on our good friend Chris. Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, nice to be here.
And so I don't know how long Errol's UFO updates list ran, but does that sound about right? Late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, it was in the 90s when it had to cease, but it went for quite some time, and it was the place for anybody who's interested in UFOs. The big names were all there, plus a lot of the smaller names. That's where people connected.
I was definitely one of the smaller names. I was always amazed at the people. I would see people's names there that had written the books that I was studying, and who were out there in the field like yourself doing this research. So always excited to hear folks who've been at this longer than I have, and who have such a breadth of knowledge on these various studies and various areas of interest. I take it that you're mostly interested in UFOs, even though you've dipped your toe into other areas.
Yeah, I started out as a true Fortean, of course, involved in all aspects of Forteana, and it just got too much. There was just too much information, and I thought to do it right, I'd have to focus on just one thing. And my background was in astronomy, so I had to I thought, okay, let's do the UFO thing then.
Great. Well, I'm really looking forward to what you have to say about the abduction phenomena. It's an area that's always been highly controversial, and having been honored to lead a local support group and study group for people who'd had strange experiences, that was my closest experience with that phenomena. And I'm curious to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure we'll have an interesting discussion on the other side of this. So I just wanted to go ahead and let you get started, and go ahead and bring up your slides and switch over to that. Okay. And I'll let you take that over, and hopefully
let's see if I can figure this out here.
Okay.
I think that's the one I want.
And I think we got it. All right. Yeah, go ahead and you can click that stop, or excuse me, click the hide button on that, right, and I'll get out of your way here.
Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I was asked specifically to give a talk on the abduction phenomenon, and which is a little unusual because I don't think I actually gave a talk on abductions all my career. I've mentioned it, and I've talked about some of the cases over the course of my research. I don't think I've actually talked specifically about abductions. And I wanted to come up with a title that really got to the core of what I feel is going on even now. So I came up with Abduction, Transduction. I can even, sing it, Abduction, Transduction, it's my production. You might remember that from another television show. But I want to talk a little bit, first of all, about me, because most of you don't even know who I am. And as Smiles mentioned, I've been mostly involved in UFOs for quite a long time. You should have on your screen right now 3 images. On the top left, you should be able to see me sitting at what was then state-of-the-art computing facility, working on data entry. And I started actually in the mid 1970s doing investigations, and I started working on data entry in the early to mid 80s. And
hey, Chris,
yes.
We're still only seeing the introductory title card.
Okay, I don't know why. We did have that problem earlier.
Oh, there we go.
There we are. Okay, yeah. We discovered that it actually sticks for some reason.
Okay. Right.
So on the top left, you can see what I was myself at a computer state-of-the-art computing center, and I'm entering data. And I've always been fascinated with data and what people are really seeing, and to try and make sense of it using computers. On the right-hand side on the top there is 1 year's worth of UFO reports in Canada. And every page is one report. And, we've had somewhere between 500 and 1,000 UFO reports in Canada reported since we began the Canadian UFO survey in 1989. The average, I think, is up around 700 or something like that. We don't have the 2024 data yet. We're still in the process of entering. I have a colleague, Leanne Sellenbach, who is helping me enter data for the 2024. I'm managing to do some too, but it's a time-consuming process. We're actually still getting 2024 case data. And on the bottom, you see me as a UFO investigator, looking a little bit younger than I am now, but that's not my main gig, I suppose. But in the 1980s, I joined with a couple of other colleagues. Now, you should be able to see Manitoba Mysteries Research Association. I'm hoping that's what you see. And we wanted to be available for any kind of Forteana, cryptids, Sasquatch, lake monsters, paranormal phenomena, UFOs. And there are a number of us who worked together, and we were sort of the UFO mystery hotline. We were the Ghostbusters. We were everything rolled into one. I went out on Sasquatch hunts. I was out looking for lake monsters. And, I've investigated a number of haunted houses too. But I really focused on the UFO thing. Although along the way, I mentioned some paranormal stuff. On the left-hand side, I'm hoping you can see myself standing next to a statue of a white horse. It's one of the few statues in the world of a ghost. We can tell you about that sometime, but you can see I was one of Winnipeg's Ghostbusters in the 1980s and into the 90s. And here I am with a group of people investigating a haunted hotel. But my main interest, and I have to settle on something, was UFOs. This is one of my first books, Unnatural History, which did cover a lot of Forteana, but had a focus on UFOs. Along the way, I got to meet some interesting creatures, as you can tell from the top right. And on the bottom left, you can clearly see I'm standing in the midst of a crop circle because I was outstanding in my field. I can hear you laughing, or no, that's not laughing. Anyways, on the right-hand side of the screen is an official government document, a military document from Canada. This is a document from NORAD. The subject is clearly seen UFO report, and they sent it to Mr. Rutkowski, spelled wrong. But I've been fascinated with trying to get official government documents about UFOs that are filed with the Canadian government. And I've been fairly successful. And among some of the documents that I was able to obtain are a lot of documents about one particular case, Falcon Lake, 1967. I'm going to mention a little bit of about this case before we get into the abduction thing, because I think it's kind of interesting. The title of this book, which I co-wrote with the witness's son, the title is When They Appeared, and it has nothing to do whatsoever with aliens in terms of the title. Anyways, it has to do with the investigators who they really showed up on the family's doorstep. Media, government investigators, military personnel, UFO clubs, by the dozens. They all wanted to talk to this fellow. And the reason is his experience in 1967 was quite remarkable. This is the official National Defense of Canada teletype describing what happened. Falcon Lake is now a resort town in Manitoba. 1967, on the 20th of May, this fellow, Mr. Stefan Mihalik, he encountered Hollywood-style flying saucers. He observed one of them that seemed to land on a rock ledge not too far from him. He got close to it. He touched the side of it with his hand, and a blast of hot gas came out of this thing. And you can see this is his original drawing and a recreation of what he saw, 35 feet across, about 12 feet high, domed on top with bright lights shooting out on the side. On the left-hand side was an exhaust vent. The right-hand side was a door that had opened and later shut. But out of the exhaust vent came a blast of hot gas, which set his clothes on fire, set fire to the vegetation around him, and the thing took off and flew away. But he was burned. This is one of the classic cases of injuries from a UFO. This is his chest area. On the top of his chest was thermal burns. You can see his hair and some part of his chest was actually singed. But on the lower part of his chest and towards his abdomen, there's called a checkerboard pattern of red marks corresponding to the pattern of the exhaust vent on the side of this thing. These were thermal burns. That some people have said they're radiation burns, but no, they're more thermal chemical burns. And there were samples taken by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Royal Canadian Air Force from the site when it was found. And as you note on the screen, The report from this Dr. Booth indicates a radiation value because there was radioactive material found at the site. And he said the radiation is from a radium source and there's a possible serious health hazard. And they thought about closing this entire resort area to the public because of a danger. So we have a physical injury to a witness. We have physical marks on the ground. We have debris, so physical traces, radioactive debris, and we have documentation like this one. These are actual documents. And it turns out that neither National Defence of Canada nor the Royal Canadian Mounted Police were able to provide evidence to dispute the story, although the investigation has been completed. A satisfactory explanation or conclusion is still lacking. So the Mounties didn't get their man. Royal Air Force had no idea what had happened. This is one of the classic cases, and I've gone on record in a number of places saying this is a hell of a lot better than Roswell or any other case, and it should be right up there in terms of classic UFO cases. In addition to that particular case, the particular book when they appeared, one of my most recent books, matter of fact, it is my most recent book. I'm working on another one, but this is Canada's UFOs Declassified, which is all about Canadian government and military UFO documents. And I detail many, many cases that you've never heard of because they were previously classified and are now declassified, or in some cases, they're still in the process. But I'm here to talk about something else. These are covers of two of my other books, Visitations and Abductions, What's Really Going On, Abductions and Aliens, What's Really Going On. Along the way, people had come to me with stories of encountering alien entities of one kind or another, bedroom visitations and so forth. And of course, as everybody knows, in the 80s and into the 90s, abductions were, top of mind. They were the in thing. And sure enough, people wanted to talk with me about them. But I had a question. For now, where are these cases now? We don't really hear much about alien abductions. Why? Have the aliens given up on poking and prodding us? What's really happened? And so the transduction part is, what has the abduction phenomenon changed into? How has it progressed, and how has it evolved? Or has it at all? And we also have to ask the other question, is there a relationship between alien abductions and other phenomena? Well, for example, let's talk about paranormal phenomena, ghosts and spirits. On the left is a list of characteristics of UFOs, most commonly seen as balls of light. Witnesses sometimes experience fear, unease, their attempt to communicate. Photos aren't clear. Orbs, electromagnetic effects. Seems that UFOs can come and go without a trace. Entities are sometimes seen, and witnesses have the overwhelming feeling that they're told, don't be afraid. As you can tell, that's completely different from characteristics of ghosts and spirits, except for the fact that they're completely identical. As a matter of fact, when I've been investigating some cases, it would be very common for, I was investigating one particular UFO case and asking, people had seen the object, the light in the sky, if they had had other experiences that were strange, and they said no, other than, the fact that, the spook light is hovering over the cemetery just down the lane from us. And we did see the ghost of our grandmother walking through the hall just last week, and all that sort of stuff. So there is a relationship, but it could be, maybe it's a matter of the witness's interpretation. If somebody's oriented towards aliens and that type of thing, they would describe UFOs, whereas if they were into paranormal and physical phenomena, ghosts and spirits, maybe they would describe them as ghosts, or in that sense. So there is that possibility. Now, in terms of abductions, there's, being taken on board, and then there's almost being taken on board. There was an interesting case in Canada in 1967, and these are two different artists' interpretations of what was seen. The story is that a woman was in her kitchen while her children were playing outside one bright summer day. And she noticed that there was a whirlwind around the house. The leaves and dirt were flying by her window as she was scrubbing pots or whatever. And she thought that was strange because there was nothing happening on the other side of the house whatsoever. And she ran outside and just in time to see a boy pulling her daughter down to the ground because she had said that this object in the sky was sucking her up into the sky. And she looked up to see what was described as a black cube with alternating sides, silver and black, that seemed to be directly over the yard where the kids were playing. The dust and debris had stopped moving as this thing moved away. And, it just was one of those things where the kids, said, we're not lying. This really happened. And there was a lot of dust and debris all over the yard where this thing had just hovered. And the woman had actually seen this thing move away herself. So was that an abduction almost? Or was that something else? And so it was a UFO kidnapping in 1967. But then we get into things a little bit later. Now, we also have to talk about the difference between abductees and contactees. And I've written this out the way I understand them, is that abductees generally believe they've had physical contact with alien entities because of a UFO encounter. There could be unwilling participation in medical examinations, yes, the probes and all that sort of stuff. But the majority of abductees describe their experiences as unpleasant. Now, yes, there are some that don't, but in general, this is something that's against their will and it's very unpleasant. Contactees, on the other hand, believe they have had physical contact with alien entities and are now engaging with entities on a physical or spiritual level. And in some cases, they're trying to spread the entity's message in some way. And the majority of contactees describe their experiences as pleasant. Now, we only have to go back a few days to listen to Jake Barber talk about how he and some other individuals were using psychic energy and psionics to vector towards a crashed or retrieved alien egg that they used their helicopter grappling hook or sling to take by. But he talked about this was a very positive thing. They were being able to communicate psychically. And so I would label Jake Barber a contactee and certainly not an abductee. But it just shows that this is going on right now. And contactees have been around for a long time. And in fact, in the 1950s, contactees were holding conventions at Giant Rock and places like that. And it was very common to have contactees talk about experiences that were very, very profound. Don't know what happened there. Excuse me. If we're going to be talking about abductees, we certainly have to talk about Betty and Barney Hill. 1961, I'm assuming that you can see this photo of them along with an artist rendering of what Betty said that she had seen. This was supposedly the captain that was on the ship. This is a very interesting case. That Kathleen Martin is her niece, and she had a lot to say about what had happened to her aunt. Stan Friedman spent a lot of time with this particular case. And, it stands as, one of the classic abductee cases of all time. And will we ever see another case like that again? But this was the type of case that intrigued me. And so when I started giving my talks and lectures about UFO phenomena in general, and I started giving them in the 1970s, and towards the 1980s, I started getting people coming to me wanting to talk with me about abduction experiences. The contactees I had heard from occasionally, but it was the abductees that seemed to want to really talk with me about it, asking me for some help in interpreting what they've been experiencing. I remember in particular one talk I gave actually at the University of Manitoba. And there were about, 300 people in the audience. I gave my presentation. And after the presentation, everybody was filing out. And I noticed one particular man was hanging back. And after everybody was gone, he came up to me and asked if he could talk to me privately about his experience. So I, agreed to meet the next day at McDonald's, I think. And we met, and he told me about some of what he was experiencing. And I used a pseudonym here as Dave Kowal. In about 1970, when he was 4 or 5 years old, he had these nightmares. He thought that he was floating out of his bedroom through a window into a field. And he doesn't remember what was going on in the field. But when he came back to his bedroom, he floated above his bed and looked down to see his bed was empty. He also remembers seeing globes of light hovering at the foot of his bed. Luis Elizondo, are you listening? Because this was happening to this fellow in the 1970s and into the 1980s. He would hide under the covers, and when he came out again, the globes of light were gone. And then he remembers seeing lights passing by his house. So he felt that something or some entities or a number of entities were keeping an eye on him. Well, he wanted some help and understanding, and he had a lot of anxiety. Now, I wanted to try and adhere to the best scientific practices that I could. And even though at that time I had a minor in psychology at the University of Manitoba, my background was more in astronomy, but I happen to know some psychologists who used clinical hypnotism as part of their psychology practice. And I went up to them and I said, I've got somebody who might be a good candidate. They're experiencing anxiety. Would you be interested in talking with this person? And I was quite surprised that the clinical psychologist said, sure. As a matter of fact, we use hypnosis with the police quite a bit to try and help victims of incidents, be more calm and try and recall further details that help the investigation. So with that in mind, eventually after a number of sessions just with the psychologist and Dave Kowal, and then just a few with myself, I was invited to an actual regressive hypnosis session, which is never done by a professional psychologist just on a whim because they feel like it or because somebody wants to. This was done as a true psychological therapy, and it was done only after a number of tests and a number of counseling sessions and therapy sessions, and the psychologist agreed maybe we'll try it. Now, I was invited to be on the other side of the two-way mirror and watched the clinical psychologist put Dave Kowal under. And as he did, he began to recall this particularly strange experience. In November 1987, Dave had been watching TV. Had just turned the set off about 1 o'clock. He had been getting ready for bed by saying his prayers, climbed in the covers, laid there listening to his clock radio, and he was laying in the darkness, and suddenly he couldn't move any part of his body. He tried to move, but couldn't budge. He felt a tingling and a sensation as if his arms were asleep, and at the same time, he sensed a presence in the room. Now, a lot of you who have probably read on these types of things would probably recognize this as a form of sleep paralysis, and very, very common as people are just, in that state between waking and sleeping. So, that was clearly part of this, but something else was going on because Dave sensed a presence in the room. Although his body was paralyzed, Dave found he could still move his eyes and could watch his digital clock radio change from minute to minute. He was very frightened, couldn't call out, and he saw a shadowy face appear directly in front of him. It was very, very grotesque, with folds of skin, very, very ugly. if you've watched The Substance, kind of that bad, with small ears and a slit-like mouth. And on top of the head was a helmet with two knobs or stumps protruding to the left and right. Now, this is reminiscent of Betty Hill's captain, who was wearing a uniform, which is usually left out of the storytelling, but he was wearing a uniform as well. This is the face that Dave Kowal drew of this entity that he seemed to be right in front of him. Pointy ears. The eyes were definitely almond-shaped, but they were puffy and scarred, sort of a pig nose. The mouth was definitely not a slit. There was something else, and you could see the folds of the fat around that. Well, as he's under, he was quite calm, but as he described the creature, Dave became very, very anxious, even more anxious than before. He said that this creature was approaching his bed and had a long, sort of a short cylindrical rod that had a light on its end. And as he extended the rod towards Dave's forehead, he became very upset. And when the light rod said he said it was actually touching his forehead, he screamed in pain, jumped off the couch with such violence that the psychologist had some trouble regaining control. He felt that something had been put into his mind and things were being pulled out as well. There were flashes like television news reports, flashes of scenery, political figures. He felt like a cow being examined by forces beyond his control. And this is the drawing that he made of the creature with the little rod. And this is what he said approached him. Another case. On November 1st, 1992, Nyla, who's a nurse living in South Winnipeg, was wakened about 2 o'clock by a loud thump on her door. Now, she thought it was noisy neighbors, and she lived near a university, and she thought that the students were just, carrying on like they usually did. And she decided to get out of bed and see who was in the hallway. But when she got into her living room, she saw two little people standing in the middle of her room. Sure, first she thought these were children or some teenagers and yelled at them, "Get the heck out of my apartment." But they didn't. And she said, "How did you get in here?" And she realized they were not children, but unusual beings with large round eyes and wearing long white gowns or robes. They were only 3.5 feet in height. She asked them to leave, but they just stood there looking at her with these round eyes. And they didn't seem to have any other facial features, and they began communicating with what she assumed was some sort of telepathy. She asked them, "What do you want?" They turned their heads to look at each other, then they turned back to her, and they said that they wanted to take her for a ride in space. Yes, this was the first of its kind of, "Hey, baby, want to come for a ride?" But this was what she said was one of these creatures looked like. Not your typical Whitley Strieber alien by any stretch of the imagination. A white-robed figure with sort of mitten hands, big round eyes, and there were two of them, 3.5 feet high, in this woman's living room. All of a sudden, after they asked her whether she wanted to go for a ride, she was in a large room like a hangar, and there were these two beings, one in front, one behind her. They led her across the floor, and they approached a cigar-shaped craft, which had a small door. They walked down an aisle in the interior. They went to a control room, looked very Star Trek-y. There were large windows, and in one of the windows was this image of Earth. And she thought that, this was some sort of craft that was hovering over the Earth. She was told they were going to the stars. They pressed the buttons, beepity boop, and this blue color in the sky deepened to black, and it looked like she was in in space. Suddenly, she found herself back in her room. Now, I had asked her, "Why are you telling me this?" And she said, "Well, I heard that you were interested in people's experiences about UFOs and aliens and that type of thing. And this is what happened to me." And I said, "Well, what do you want me to do with this? And you want me to go to the TV or radio or the newspaper? She says, no, I don't want that. I'm telling you because I've heard you were interested. And I said, well, was it possible that this was just a dream? And she says, when I found myself back in my room, it was a few hours later, and my bed hadn't changed, and I was on the other side of the bed from where I should have been. And it just seemed like it was so real. And she says, I don't have time as a nurse doing several shifts in a row. I don't watch TV. I don't watch Star Trek or Star Wars or any of that type of thing. Not interested in science fiction. This is just something that happened to me. And she says, I've never had vivid dreams like this before. What do you do with cases like this? And I had case after case after case coming to me with similar stories. I had somebody come to me about something that had happened when they were kids. Nephews and nieces and them were playing hide and seek, and they all looked up in the sky and saw 4 objects in a row from south to north, balls of light. Some seemed to be moving around, and they were so frightened by this that they scattered, but they hid into the bushes. They didn't know what to do. People were staring up into the sky. It was very, very strange, but they had foggy memories. Then I heard from a fellow named Randy, and he was convinced that he was chosen and in contact with alien creatures, spiritual entities from a higher dimension. He was going to be one of their emissaries. And he told me this story. He was alone in his basement bedroom at the home of his parents. Yes, he lived with his parents. At about 10:30 at night, he was listening to heavy metal rock music. Suddenly, violent banging began on his bedroom door. My mother and brother confronted me, demanding I turn down the volume. We all got into an argument, and their eyes changed and took on cold, glassy stares. Their temperaments altered and became violently hostile. It appeared to me that someone else seemed to be in control of their actions, and I became frightened. I locked my bedroom door against these strangers who were threatening to have me physically removed from the premises. Okay, was this an alien contact, or is just a jerk who played his music too loud in his parents' home? I don't know. But where do you draw the line? How do you actually deal with these types of cases? Not just phone calls and emails, but I got letters. This is from a farm couple. And the mother sent me a note saying, and I'll read this to you. I have a son who is now 17, going on 18 years in January 99. Since he was 3 years old, he had been bothered by aliens, and he feels at one time during his younger years, he may have been visited by these creatures. He has always been upset and afraid that they will be back for him. Some nights are worse than others. Now, clearly, if someone is, being bothered and is upset and there's anxiety, there seems to be a reason for, referring to counseling or to medical doctors, psychiatrists, psychologists, therapists, you name it, because there's some anxiety here. And if you throw the aliens in the mix, that makes it more interesting, but more problematic. The letter went on. The son can describe what he has seen and when and where he was 3, 4, 5 years old. This tortures him daily for too many years, and he just wants a few answers so he can put this finally to rest. He was being tortured mentally and emotionally. And when I suggested perhaps that they should talk to a doctor, the family doctor, or get some counseling, well, he's not crazy. He's just, he wants somebody to understand about the alien creatures. What do you do with this? And this made me really determined that UFO investigators and UFO researchers and the average UFO fan should not be involved in abduction cases. Simply not. And it became even more problematic when a fellow came to me with a belief that the aliens were keeping an eye on him day and night. And this was also true of Dave Kowal. In fact, he thought the aliens had not stopped visiting him. And a year after we had conducted this hypnosis session, I actually got a phone call from a spiritual pastor at a hospital in the city, because Dave Kowal had attempted suicide because he couldn't stand the aliens constantly being around him and invading his mind. And as soon as you hear something like that, an attempted suicide, and I wish I could say that that was the only abductee that attempted suicide, but no, there are at least a few others who had such profound experiences and profound beliefs that they were, seriously having some mental health issues. And that's way beyond the scope of anything in ufology. I don't care whether you're a star team or not. You should not have anything to do with abductions. And yet, it gets worse. You see these headlines all the time. Here was somebody who killed his daughter and attempted to kill his son because of aliens in his head. So I didn't know exactly how to deal with a lot of this stuff. So I talked with my counseling associates and psychologists and medical professionals. And at this time, abductee support groups were very, very common. And I was encouraged that perhaps the best thing I could do would be to create an abductee support group. So I thought, well, at the very least, I can at least, meet with people and give them recommendations and try and get them to seek medical help. So I created an abductee support group, and it ran the same way and the same style as a 12-step group. What stays in here, what's said in here stays in here, that type of thing. I had a disclaimer. I said, the intent of this group is a forum where you're completely free to share your thoughts without feeling anxious. This is therapeutic discourse. I'm not recommending this group as your sole form of therapy. I would recommend a formal appointment with a clinical psychologist or a doctor to help you deal with your anxiety, depression, or other emotions. And again, what is said in here stays in here, and no crosstalk and, all that sort of stuff. And I ran it for about maybe a year and realized even my presence, encouraging people to talk in the forum, was not helping at all. In fact, it got to the point where somebody was saying, well, your alien was from Centauri, but mine was actually from Xandor, a completely different constellation. Excuse me. They are comparing the shape of the eyes, the color of the skin, the design of the UFOs and saucers. There was clear contamination, bad enough that they were getting it from books and magazines and so forth. This is before social media. Just imagine how these things are a problem now. But to show how wrapped up people can get with this type of thing, I met Vanetta Chouinard. Now, Vanetta was quite interesting in that after I had appeared on TV one time, she telephoned me from her home and wanted to know if I wanted to hear her story of being taken on board a flying saucer and meeting the Space Brothers. Now, this was different than abductees in the sense that she was convinced that the Space Brothers were benevolent and that she was having a good relationship with them. And so she was having these profound experiences that were not against her will and so forth. This was something that she was participating in and actively participating in. She was actually from Nova Scotia, and while she was there, a number of UFOs and balls of light were seen hovering over a field. The next morning, a cross was burned into this particular field. Now, this gets into a religious aspect. Smiles alluded to the fact that, I contributed to a chapter in Reframing the Debate about how there's a lot of religious aspect to a lot of UFO phenomena. This was clearly one of those. Not only were these burned markings in this field, but there are other landing marks, and this is a newspaper clipping with Vanetta pointing out UFO scientist shows a landing mark. She was certainly not a scientist, but she and other people from a family watched a small glowing object shot from a red flying saucer land and absorbed electricity from power lines. So there's a lot of memes built into here. And this sort of disturbed me that an alien craft was seen over this field, raising rocks out of the ground. The power grid, as I mentioned, was ill affected. And the family dog was burned by radiation. And she showed off these terrible red marks on the family dog, which were of concern to me. I really was very uncomfortable hearing her describe this, but she said that that a spring came out with this beautiful flowing water, and she would do healings at this particular religious site in Nova Scotia. Well, she had asked if I wanted to talk with her, and I said, sure. So she actually drove 6 hours in one day to come meet me. And this is my apartment, and this is Vanetta, who came to talk with me. And I had actually had time because she was taking 6 hours to drive with her husband to call up some of my friends and associates so she could give a presentation to kind of an audience. When she was with us, she showed us her station wagon that she and her husband had been driving, and she showed us these amazing radioactive burn marks on the station wagon, because the station wagon itself was levitated by the UFO and the Space Brothers. However, it looked really just like rust or something to me, but it could have been. I mean, I don't know. The other thing is that this religious site in Nova Scotia, she and her followers, yes, she actually had followers as a mini cult, built a pyramid for meditating in the middle of a field. And this is the pyramid that was constructed so that she and her group could actually hold religious ceremonies and hang around in the field. So I at one point asked Vanetta, do you have any physical proof on yourself? I mean, I saw the burns on the dog, and I saw the radioactive burn marks on the station wagon. But what other physical proof do you have? I mean, you've been on board spaceships. And she says, yes. She was taken on board one of the ships, and they put her on some sort of advanced alien X-ray machine, where they X-rayed her arm, and they found cancer within her arm near her wrist. And they decided immediately they had to get rid of the cancer. So they used advanced alien surgical techniques to open up her arm, take out the cancer, and she was all healed up. And she proudly rolled up her sleeve and showed off her arm and showed that there was not a single scar, any indication that anything had ever been done to her wrist or arm, thus proving her story. Well, I can't go through abductions without talking about signs that you have been abducted. Now, at the time, during the height of the abduction craze, a number of organizations had produced a list of signs that you were abducted. And the idea is that I forget how many there were in total. I haven't printed off the whole thing, but there were, dozens and dozens and dozens of things that should tip you off that you probably have been abducted by aliens. Missing or lost time, obviously, paralyzed in bed, unusual scars, have seen beams of light outside your home, dreams of UFOs, have had a UFO sighting in your life. Well, number 9, a lot of people have had UFO sightings. Does that mean that you were abducted? Number 10, have a cosmic awareness and interest in ecology, environment, vegetarianism, or are very socially conscious. Well, I charge that a lot of you watching or listening right now have probably had some of that. What about nosebleeds? Have you woken with soreness in your genitals, which cannot be explained? Well, I don't know about that, but number 32, back and neck problems, T3, I have that. Chronic sinusitis, I have that. It's ringing in your ears, I have tinnitus. Insomnia, dreams of doctors, sporadic headaches, especially in the sinus behind one eye or in one ear. My gosh, I must have been abducted, just like you. And Fred Flintstone, although Fred managed to get away with it. And I conclude with a political comment, and I couldn't get away with not including a political comment. America needs a space-age president. In 1960, Gabriel Green ran as a candidate for president. Abe in 1860, Gabe in 1960. And he promised progress instead of prattle, principles instead of personalities. He ran on the UFO ticket. He wanted everybody to recognize, and the government to recognize alien intervention. Maybe get some sort of emissaries involved so that we can communicate better with the aliens. He was with the Amalgamated Flying Saucer Clubs of America. And, that appealed to a lot of people, but nowhere near enough to get him elected. Darn. And hence my presentation. And I'm going to go over here now.
Yep.
And I'm going to stop sharing. There.
All right. Thank you, Chris. So on that political comment, interestingly enough, it was on a local podcast, UFO Garage, some local UFO friends of mine who had Lou Elizondo on a couple of times, and in it he was basically threatening to run for some political office, and if the state didn't step up and do what was necessary, what he's trying to get happening. Yeah, Gabriel Green, man. What?
Gabriel Green. Yeah. And actually in Canada, there was a fellow who was a magician, and I'm trying to remember his name. I'm blanking out right now. But he ran for a political office, and he was a practiced TM, and he said that he could levitate and all sorts of stuff. And he was on the ticket to be Canadian Prime Minister. Going back, I'm thinking now this was probably in the 80s, but there from time to time people pop up.
Well, and then there was your former political guy who I know had come out as
Paul Hellyer.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great last name.
Yeah.
I think he spells it differently than the Dana and Greg Newkirk TV series, but
Right.
interesting. Well, I having run a support group, I didn't start it. It was started by somebody who was themselves a perceived experiencer, abductee, and when that person felt she was getting messages from the universe telling her that she needed to go west, offered the reins to me. And since I had met her through the local Mutual UFO Network chapter here in Austin, Texas, I said, well, certainly I haven't had these experiences, so I would only be willing to do it if the existing group was on board with that, and they were. But yes, an incredibly challenging process, because I, like you, I try to bring some science, but remain agnostic. And I keep thinking of the words of Jerome Clark, another famous UFO researcher, who, upon, I think it was when he was receiving the Dinsdale Award, said, we ought to be able to believe our witnesses without believing in what they're saying happened to them. And I think that's a really important thing, is to listen, to hear. But yeah, it can be incredibly challenging to be in that situation where they're going to, as you described, cross-contaminate. And again, when this was happening, this was at the height of the abduction
Craze
surge, but it does not compare now to where we are with this media saturation, this ability to find so much more information, and social media as it is. But it's interesting to me, and you alluded to this at the beginning, and this is a question I guess I'll pose, is do you still get those same do you still get the same amount of inquiries, or do you think people who are having these experiences maybe have other outlets? But it's been said a number of times that, and I think this is an exaggeration, but that abductions ceased after 9/11.
Yeah, I would say that, yeah, prior to the turn of the millennium, abductions were going pretty good, and then they seemed to sort of stop. What we get now, and I don't have people coming to me with abduction stories or contact stories necessarily, because one of the reasons why that we were receiving these inquiries was there was really no outlet for it. And now with social media, and some larger media that are focused on this, I get emails or messages from people who say, I am in contact. I don't need you to tell me whether I am or not. I am. And I see them all the time, and I take photos and videos every night. There's actually one fellow who sends me emails literally every day of the alien ships that he videos every night. And he's convinced that they are in fact, watching him and communicating with him, and they've chosen him for whatever reason. That's the type of thing that I get, that people are convinced that they are chosen. And the whole idea of whether you're going to be taken on board and probed, that seems to be less a thing now, but the spiritual aspect seems to be definitely there. The psychic aspect, I mentioned, the most recent whistleblower. Of course, there's going to be a psychic aspect to it. Why not? And these are the types of things that you really can't prove, and it won't do any good to say that, that type of thing has not been, demonstrated scientifically. Well, that doesn't seem to matter. This is what people are reporting, and this is what people are claiming, and people are accepting it completely blindly. So is it even worth trying to open up that kind of discussion? Because in most cases, people are convinced of their own reality, and their reality is better than my reality, and it's, well, how do you deal with that? So it certainly is challenging. It's which is in some ways strange, because the whole idea of UAP and drones and whatever conjures up nuts and bolts ufology, a throwback to the 50s and 60s. But then you throw in this consciousness and the communicating psychically and vectoring and all this sort of stuff that's completely not nuts and bolts. And that seems to be a throwback to the contactee aspect, which is, again, a reflection of the religious aspect. So if I was to boil it down, I'd say we're in a definite religious stage of ufology right now.
And of course, former director of ARROW, All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, Sean Kirkpatrick, his repetitive critique was that basically there's this danger of a new UFO religion. And of course, in academia, we have this sea change happening largely through the religious studies programs with Jeff Kripal and Diana Pasulka and others. You mentioned this recent alleged whistleblower, Jacob Barber, and his psionic ability. And yeah, it reminded me of, again, John Keel talking about there being thousands of what he called silent contactees, people who are having these experiences, but they're not looking for publicity. They're not trying to make a buck, and they're not even trying to proselytize necessarily. But if they have the opportunity to talk about it, they probably will. We do have a question, but we've already kind of touched on this, but a viewer asked, what do you think of CE5? I'm referring to the protocols of Stephen Greer or other attempts to attract and contact UAPs or other entities.
Well, I mean, the instance that comes to mind is the one where Greer had taken people, I think it was along the Florida coast or the Carolina coast. People had paid a lot of money, and I guess he said, now look over there, and then some lights were seen. And it turns out that he or an associate had hired a plane to fly out there. I mean, there's all sorts of great stories zipping around about this. But the reality is, and we get this now with all these drone sightings, there's lots of stuff up there just flying around anyways. You could point anywhere in the sky. I mean, you could, right now, if you had a clear sky, go look up, and chances are you would see some lights moving around. You don't necessarily have to vector them with your mind. And I guess again, this comes up with the nuts and bolts versus religion. If it's a nuts and bolts flying saucer, you need to psychically vector them into land or be seen. I mean, that's more of a religious connection rather than a nuts and bolts connection. So I don't know if I buy the C5 protocol thing. I do know it costs a lot of money to go through the whole thing, and I think if you go down to Sedona, you can probably find somebody to vector UFOs for free. But it's how people are dealing with their own reality and their own belief systems. And one could argue, if they are content not proselytizing and it's just how they deal with reality, is it any harmful in any way? And I would say to the average person, it's not harmful, except that in society, misinformation and a lack of scientific understanding could be harmful. And I think we've reached that point where we have to really ask these hard questions.
I agree. And as somebody who studied parapsychology and who has always felt that, from my personal experience, there is psi phenomena, and I do think that there's good scientific evidence through parapsychological research. I know a lot of people disagree with that, and that's fine. But I do think that there's enough evidence of these phenomena like telepathy and anomalous cognition and that sort of thing to at least look at look at those aspects of close encounters and UFO experiences and events with that in mind, even as others have said, deceased Mactonies and others, this idea, the classic idea of, not that he quite said this, but any significantly advanced technology will appear as magic, or as psi phenomena, perhaps. Maybe there is a technological explanation, but telepathy is such a part of these experiences, even not just even close encounters, but experiences with quote unquote lights in the sky. And so on the one hand, I do, if there is some kind of consciousness that's non-human or otherwise involved in these phenomena, I can entertain that possibility. But I agree. I think that we have entered into a period where I think Vallée many years ago warned about the possibility of us moving into a new dark age.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, the fact that there's memes on both sides of the trust the science phrase, pretty much shows that we're in a very taut, tense period of time where that is such a part of this. And it's come up even in the post 2017 ATIP Elizondo, stuff about, there's these groups in the government who don't want us looking into this because they're convinced it's demonic or some kind of negative spiritual force. Another viewer asks or says, "Thank you for the presentation. Can I ask an unrelated question to abductions? As a librarian and researcher, I'm interested in whether you have any thoughts on how or whether libraries and library staff, librarians could or should help ensure important UFO research materials remain accessible for years to come. And thank you for donating your archive to a library."
Any advice? I would say try and solicit as much as possible. Rice University has done a great job. A number of universities in Canada have a number of collections now. I think it's important, and the important work that Isaac Coy is doing with the researchers in Sweden, AFU, in preserving this type of information, it's tremendously important. And even if it has nothing to do with aliens, it's important because it documents an aspect of human interaction and who we are, our belief systems. It shows our relationship with ourselves and with the universe, and that in itself is important to be preserved so we can better understand who we are, not necessarily who is up there, but that could be part of it. And I'm just going to say, I understand your position, Smiles. It's interesting. I've been called a skeptic, although skeptics say that I'm too much of a believer. They won't allow me into the club. So where do I stand? And I call myself an open-minded skeptic or a doubting believer. I've tested psychics, in controlled situations. I've tested remote viewers. And the problem with some of the people vectoring UFOs and whatever, there are a lot of people who come to me who said that, I can go out on any night and I can, communicate and get the lights in the sky to move to my command. And I've gone out and they're seeing satellites and planes and they think that they're controlling them somehow. Now, do I doubt that it's possible if there's an advanced civilization that they might have, created some form of telepathy or, nonverbal communication through mind actions and all that sort of stuff. I hear what you're saying, that an advanced civilization might have technology that's indistinguishable from magic. Yes, that's true, but we don't have that yet. And on Earth, we have a lot of evidence where people think that it's happening, but it simply can't be scientifically proven or proven beyond incontrovertible doubt. So I think we have to be very, very careful before we accept everything. And of course, debunkers accept nothing. And a lot of people who are UFO fans accept everything. And I think it's, somewhere in between is probably a good place to be. And somebody had said, I hope you're going to be, sane-ish today. And I'm hoping that I'm acting and sounding sane-ish. That might be a good place to end on.
Well, I want to say, I've always appreciated your perspective, and I always get something out of what you have to say. And I'm glad that there are people like you to push back on my beliefs personally. I know, I just remember some of our back and forth in the day about the tectonic strain theory and Earth lights research, and I greatly appreciate having somebody like you to bounce these ideas around with. And the one last thing I just wanted to comment on, and if you got any last questions or comments, folks, go ahead and put them in the chat there. But when describing, I tend to be, I guess, a generalist, and I do tend to like a 40 and kind of lump all these things. Well, that's not necessarily 40, but I do want to try to have that theory of everything, and lump all these things together. Mm-hmm. And when you were describing the similarities between UFOs and ghosts, it reminds me of the phrase that Joshua Cutchin has used, Wildnisgeist, to describe the fact that the phenomena that a lot of people looking for Bigfoot experience when they're out in the forest searching for that cryptid would fit the description of a poltergeist, except that because they're out in nature and not inside a house, they don't have the same context for it. And I do think that there is some kind of import to that idea, but that's just my own and obviously others' idea. But so folks can go to your various websites, uforum.blogspot.com. There's also Canadian UFO Report.com, where you post all the data that you gathered. Of course, it takes some time, as you were saying. It's not something easily done overnight. And we really appreciate your giving of yourself, your archives, to a University of Manitoba. We need to get a new fun GoFundMe for that too, because like you say, it does take resources to get these things processed. So hopefully that will get more digitized soon. And I just want to say again, thank you so much for this lecture and for your lifetime of work in this field. And any final thoughts?
No, I'm a member of the Galileo Project, so I'm well aware of attempts to look at things in the sky. I was just I was listed as an advisor for the Canadian Sky Canada project, which was released last week, on trying to understand how Canadian government can look at UFOs. Or trying to understand how UAP should be handled and what's the process. And I've been involved as an advisor for paranormal groups. And I mentioned at the beginning, I've gone out Sasquatch hunting and lake monster hunting and all that sort of stuff. I find it all fascinating, and I think that the varieties of human experience are so profound and so wonderful that how could you not be interested in this? And being a Fortean is probably one of the best things you can be in this day and age, because you can, you can look at the absurdity that's going on around us and just say, that's what it's like to be human today.
And yes, indeed. Well, thank you again, folks. So next month, we're going to have a presentation by another UFO presentation by Aaron Gullius, who, of course, has also been researching these phenomena for a while. He's going to be talking about, I think, the Detroit Saucer Club. And then in March, date yet to be determined, we should be having, hopefully, a presentation, subject to be determined, by our good friend, journalist and researcher Micah Hanks. And again, folks can go to Canadian UFO Report.com and uforum.blogspot.com for more of Chris's work.
And I'm on social media all over the place too. So,
all right, just look it up, and we'll be in touch, and we'll get you on the weekly Anomaly Now show again sometime soon to talk about this stuff.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a good night, and be safe and stay warm.